Otherkin, someone who identifies as a non-human species or mythological entity. Kitsune, elves, dragons, fae, angels, demons, celestials, aliens. What do they all have in common? They're all identities of those who go by the term Otherkin. But why? It's not quite furry, though some are furry adjacent, and it's not quite therianthropy, though some overlap. It's just them, the Otherkin, those who identify as something different, inhuman. And just like therianthropy, it too has enjoyed a tremendous surge of popular interest on social media in recent years. So who are Otherkin exactly? And do they have anything to do with furries or Therians for that matter? Can Otherkin be Therians? Can furries be Otherkin? Can anyone be Otherkin? Where did it all begin again? Let's find out. Hi everyone, I'm Stormi, and this is my deep dive into the world of Otherkin. From here on out, I need to disclose that I am not Otherkin nor Therian myself, and as such, this video will consist of research to the best of my ability and interviews with Otherkin who agreed to share their thoughts on what their subculture means to them. Otherkin are a subculture of people who identify as partially or entirely non-human. Some Otherkin believe their identity derives from spiritual phenomena like a non-human soul or reincarnation, ancestry, symbolism, or even a metaphor, or perhaps an abstract idea. Otherkin is so much more than just possibly identifying as an anthropomorphic animal. So much more. Meanwhile, others attribute it to unusual psychology or neurodivergence and do not hold spiritual beliefs on the subject. Much like therianthropy, there's no way to become Otherkin. You either are or you're just not. Otherkin is also not a gender identity. The general rule is that Therians are people who identify as non-human beings like cats, bears, snakes, or any other animal that has or has ever existed in nature, while Otherkin are individuals who believe they're non-human species and instead identify as a mythical or fantasy-related being. Furries do not believe they're actually animals or mythical creatures unless they're an Otherkin that happens to be a furry, or a Therian furry. Let's make that clear. In direct context, kin refers to species, while other refers to other than how they were born, hence the term Otherkin. The Otherkin subculture in part grew out of online communities for people identifying as elves in the early to mid-1990s. The word has since come to be treated as an umbrella term, so to speak, for a number of non-human identity subcultures which developed around the same time. In the Middle English Dictionary circa 1981, Otherkin is defined as an adjective, which refers to different or an additional kind of or kinds of. In 2017, the Oxford English Dictionary defined Otherkin as someone who identifies as non-human, typically as being wholly or partially an animal or mythical being. Again, to reiterate, furries and Otherkin are totally and completely separate things. Just as Therians and furries aren't the same thing, neither are furries and Otherkin, and Therians and Otherkin. That being said, however, it is possible to be both a furry and Otherkin. Otherkins often enjoy hanging out with the furry fandom, with furry roleplay spaces typically being a welcome environment to express themselves, hence why they may appear to be numerous within the furry community. When it comes to Therians and Otherkin, however, there's some interesting overlap between the two. Enter Theriomythic, a phrase often used by individuals who find themselves straddling between the Otherkin and Therian communities. For example, they may identify as a dragon Otherkin, but feel that their dragon may be more feral, aka lacking walking and talking traits found in humans, as to being anthropomorphic, aka walking or talking like a human, and they may feel more comfortable sharing their experiences instead with Therians. In one Otherkin's words, I am an Otherkin, but something that's a creature purely of instinct. Mythical animal, not mythical sapience. So, where did it all begin? The earliest recorded use of the term Otherkin in the context of a subculture appeared in July 1990, and the variant Otherkind was reported as early as April 1990. But the community officially didn't exist until all the way back to the 1970s, starting among a group of people who identified as elves or elvenkind. In the furry community, approximately 5% of those active in the furry fandom consider themselves Otherkin, 2% less than Therians. And while I can source and cite Otherkin publications till the day TikTok shuts down, what better way to learn about the Otherkin community than interviewing them?
Hi there, it's Protowave. You probably remember me from Stormi's video about Therians. Stormi asked me to record for this video as well, so here I am. Full disclosure about my role in this video. All of the interviews Stormi conducted were originally over text only. My job was to provide a voice for what was written. I didn't originally write any of them. The thoughts and opinions in each interview are not my own, and they belong to their respective original creators.
So because Otherkin are such a broad category and sometimes stigmatized, we weren't able to interview every type of Otherkin, and as such, these interviews are not representative of the community as a whole. If you want to learn more, check out the links in the description. How did you find out you're Otherkin?
The way I found out I was Otherkin was quite strange, actually. I had installed Telegram to speak to this guy who, at the time, I was, for lack of better terms, sexting, and at some point he was just sending me memes, and one of those was from a trans and Otherkin chat. Being trans myself, I joined, and through exposure to Otherkin, I was able to discover my own Otherkin identity.
What does Otherkin mean to you?
What Otherkin means to me? To me, that means to identify with something inhuman, like a yokai or an elf or a dragon or a robot. Being Otherkin is acknowledging that you are something more than just your flesh, something else that is more you than your vessel could ever be with today's technology.
What are some common misconceptions?
One common misconception I can think of that Otherkin experience is that people think we are just the Furry Plus package, but that's just simply not true. There may be some overlap, but the big difference is that Otherkin are the anthro, or whatever they identify as, not just some fictional character.
It's important to note that despite Otherkin identity and gender identity being totally and completely separate things, many Otherkin and Therians often find others in the trans and furry community. Not overlap, but the openness of said communities create an environment where embracing your identity can blossom. And again, furries and Otherkin are not the same thing, okay? How did you find out you're Otherkin?
It's kind of funny, actually. I had learned what it was, and that one of the ways to know is phantom limbs, ears, tails, claws, that sort of thing. And I actually felt my, past life ears move one day while I was sitting on the couch.
What does Otherkin mean to you?
Otherkin to me means someone with a non-human soul trapped in a human's body. It's essentially an offshoot of being trans, just more spiritual.
What are some common misconceptions?
As for common misconceptions, we are not zoophiles. That's the only one I've run into.
In this, you could see how Otherkin are more of a belief about oneself than anything else. This particular Otherkin was surprised by what they are, but they clearly feel there's a spiritual component to it. Like most belief systems, there are always misconceptions about it, though that's true for a lot of communities. Interestingly, this is another Otherkin that points out that it is very much an identity, but one is innately like gender identity. A separate thing, but still sharing similarities. How did you find out your Otherkin?
I had, and still have, Otherkin friends, and I started to really connect with their experiences. I had already come to the realization that I was non-cishet, and one night when chatting with one of my friends, I realized my feelings and experiences of feeling out of place over the years were because I wasn't human at all.
What does Otherkin mean to you?
Being outside the human sphere of what a quote-unquote person should be.
What are some common misconceptions?
It's common to assume we're mentally ill, or that being Otherkin is a product of substance use. Typically, it's a lifelong thing. We've always known, but it's taken until our awakening to realize that. It's also common to assume any dysphoria is the cause of being Otherkin, instead of the other way around.
What does Otherkin mean to you?
In simplicity, Otherkin is the next step of transhumanism. Being in the same umbrella of Therian, there is little difference besides that Otherkin's identity and forms are not tied to this realm specifically. Subjective to my opinion, mythical or fictional creatures of this realm can also apply as an identity for Otherkin. Assigning what is or isn't Otherkin holds little concern, as the identity of Therian and Otherkin intertwine. So I would be surprised and disgusted if there were heated arguments about what belongs where. Otherkin, as its name suggests, is other creatures that otherwise currently don't exist physically in this realm.
What are some common misconceptions?
Something interesting, though it's not so much a misconception, but rather just a rude gesture forced upon Otherkin, as well as Therians, is the response of, well, everything you think you are is fake. You're not real. You'll never be X species. You're delusional. I keep seeing the patterns with the rhetoric used against Therian and Otherkin as the same rhetoric used against trans and queer. The bare differences between these hateful accusations is simply the recipient and target of the remarks.
Many Otherkin prefer anonymity, as they are often stigmatized, despite research proving that they are not mentally ill or delusional. Otherkin are very assured that they are in human bodies, and stigmatize those who believe that physical transformation is possible or desirable. Otherkin are very aware that they wear human forms, and they interact just fine with society as a whole, many of them remaining quiet about their differences and beliefs outside their own spaces. While the Otherkin label is large enough that it sometimes overlaps with others, sometimes those others distance themselves from Otherkin. Some, however, are more permissive and see being Otherkin as related to being Therian, or even parts of the same thing. It's difficult to describe being individual states of mind, and of course, myself not being Otherkin. Whew. As much as I enjoyed this psychoanalysis on Otherkin, this was probably one of the hardest scripts I've ever done. What makes it so difficult to understand is the guidelines aren't nearly as well established compared to the Therianthropy community, and what factoids I can find focus more around a belief system. There's no solid meaning to the phrase Otherkin other than a person who identifies as non-human, typically as being wholly or partially an animal or mythical being. It's definitely a brain teaser I'll have to come back and visit someday. But until then, if you enjoyed my analysis, be sure to like this video, subscribe Leone. Are you Otherkin, a Therian, a Furry, or just curious about Otherkin as a whole? Let me know down below. And if you really enjoyed my project, consider supporting me on my Patreon for perks like early access to vids, my Discord server, deleted scenes, and more.